John McDonnell is one of 7 Labour MPs who currently have the whip suspended. And the former Shadow Chancellor has now written a piece in The Guardian with a warning to the Prime Minister. He says there's a threat lurking right underneath Labour's nose, and it's from the left. The subheading, the party wants to seem in control, but many of its MPs have knife-edge majorities that a challenger could obliterate. After reading that article, I caught up with John to elaborate on what he wrote, but I started by asking John McDonnell to give an update on his own suspension.
If people recall, there were 7 of us suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party, so suspension of the whip, it's called. That was when we voted to scrap the 2-child limit. It's a 6-month suspension, so that 6 months are up now. And the decision will be taken. It'll be taken by Keir Starmer, basically, about whether they restore the whip to us, or whether they continue on. They renew it another 6 months, or they just continue it on. We'll know. Hopefully, we'll know over the next few weeks.
And do you have any kind of prediction as to what will happen? Has there been any suggestion, official or otherwise, as to your prospects of being readmitted?
No, I've tried to pick up what I can by way of the sort of attitude that there is. It's interesting, quite a number of members of the Parliamentary Labour Party were a bit shocked when the whip was taken off us. And there's, interestingly enough, quite a number of the new members have bumped into me in the corridors in the Commons and things like that and expressed their concern about what happened. So I think most people want to just see it resolved and we can all move on. But who can tell? It's very difficult to know the decision-making processes around Keir Starmer's office and what their motivations are.
And I mean, presumably, I don't have any inside knowledge of how this works. Of course, I don't think anyone would expect me to with this current leadership. But I would imagine that there would be conditions for you to get your whip back. I imagine there would sort of be, you won't vote on amendments to budgets or finance bills and other things that you're supposed to do or not do. Are you going to be sort of willing and prepared to sign up to something like that?
Well, there was a 6-month suspension for one particular issue. So I'd expect that once the 6 months has been served, that's it. If they want to come back with conditions, well, we'd have to see what they are. But it's very difficult to abide by conditions when you don't really know what's coming up. There might be something significant of principle in the future, which I would want to vote differently from the whips, and that's the reality of being a member of Parliament. You have to make the judgments on the basis of what is best for your constituents, what's best for the country, and at that stage, it's difficult to sign an oath where you're never going to vote against something that the government brings forward, because there might be issues that are so significant, as significant as the 2-child limit was for a number of us. But anyway, we'll see what they come back with. If there's a whole range of draconian conditions, I think that most people would see that as unacceptable.
And let's talk about your intervention in The Guardian today. So sort of the argument being Keir Starmer seems very concerned with losing votes to the right, less concerned with losing votes to the left, and you think that's a mistake. I mean, are you sort of setting the scene for not your own launch of a left-wing party, but your friend Jeremy Corbyn launching a left-wing party, and you think that might happen soon and Keir Starmer needs to prepare?
The basis of my argument in The Guardian is this, that the Labour Party has been successful, I think most successful, when it's abided by the founding principles of the party, which is the broad church approach. You're bringing together a coalition of progressives on the left, right and centre. And in that way, one, you're stronger because you've got a range of ideas flowing in and you've got a range of talent as well from across the political spectrum on the left. But in addition to that, you're more reflective of what's in society itself. You're more reflective of the progressive left, right and centre of society. And if you try and break up that broad church, what then happens is you become increasingly unrepresentative of the very people you want to represent. And as a result of that, people get disillusioned. They don't know what to vote for. And what we've seen in the polls is a real collapse of our support, as you know, from the general election, but also in council by-election after council by-election, our loss of vote has been staggering. Anything between 10 and 30% drop in our vote. And in the council by-elections, it looks as though our vote is staying at home. So the consequences of disillusioning people, because you're breaking up that broad church approach, you're isolating a section, quite a significant section of that alliance that formed the Labour Party, is that people get disillusioned and they just stay at home. But there's also a risk, of course, there always has been, of those progressive left votes going elsewhere. And we have seen, there's evidence, the polling that was done, the research that was done by Compass, for example, demonstrated, yes, we have lost Labour votes to the Greens, we have lost them to the Lib Dems, yes, we've lost some to Reform as well, but the progressive left have gone to the Greens and the Lib Dems, not on any specific scale or significant scale at the moment, but actually what Reform has demonstrated is that the first past the post system no longer provides the same level of protection to the main political parties, Labour and Conservatives, that it did in the past. And I'm saying to the Labour Party, your risk in future elections is if you keep on isolating and undermining the left within that broad coalition of the Labour, the broad church, you will lose support through disillusionment, staying at home vote. And if there was an organisation on the left that came together, even though there's been successive failures of this in the past, even if that took a few hundred votes in certain constituencies, Labour's majority at the moment is based on a large number of constituencies that we only won with a few hundred votes. So I'm saying basically to those that are making decisions, strategic decisions within the Labour Party, what you're doing is you're risking the undermining of that broad church approach. And as a result of that, yeah, you've got threats from the right, but the warning is actually you've got problems on the left as well, as people will stay at home disillusioned, or go to the Greens, or go to the Lib Dems, or if there is a new left formation, go into that new left formation. And the solution is return to the principles upon which the Labour Party was founded, which is that broad church approach, but also respect for different views within the party, and also respect for the democratic procedures within the Labour Party as well, particularly of the selection of candidates, whether it's a council candidate or a parliamentary candidate. So it's a warning, if you like, to what the risks are if the path that they're pursuing at the moment is continued.
And is this a sort of a problem that you've identified about sort of how they treat people or about policy? So, I mean, is this intervention to say you need to give us back the whip to restore Labour to being a broad church, or is it to say you need to start implementing some more left-wing policies to more effectively compete with the Greens or any other sort of independent left-wing Labour Party that sets up?
That's a more fundamental point about democracy and the nature of Labour Party and socialist democracy in particular. So, of course, that has implications for policy, because if you close down debate within the party, if you close down the development of ideas, and if you don't encourage debate and the development of ideas, what happens is you start implementing policies which are unacceptable to quite a significant majority within our party and elsewhere. So, for example, look at the reason that the Labour Party has dipped in popularity in this recent period is there have been some staggering mistakes on policy. Two-child limit, I think, was a huge mistake to leave another 500,000 children in poverty. But the winter fuel allowance cut, which came out of the blue, that wasn't consulted on, it wasn't debated, it wasn't discussed, and yet it came out of the blue and has alienated a large number of our own members, as well as our supporters, as well as the general population. Then again, the WASPI decision not to provide any form of justice to the WASPI women, again, not consulted on, not debated. And I think if there had been a free vote amongst the Parliamentary Labour Party members, and certainly amongst Labour Party members, we would have a compensation scheme being put in place for the WASPI women. So there's issues like that which demonstrate when you start disrespecting the democratic principles of our party, you make mistakes and policy decisions that are flying the face of, I think, the beliefs, the core beliefs of our party. That's the first thing. The second thing, it does relate to people in position. We've just seen over these last few days, it was actually after I'd written the article, but what happened in Broxtowe, where a large number of the sitting Labour councillors were told they wouldn't be selected for the council elections in May. And a large number of them, with party members, have now left the party and formed an independent group. And selections have been so tightly controlled at council and parliamentary level. Local party members are thinking, well, why am I a member of this party when I can't have a say over who's going to represent me in my local ward or in my constituency party? So it undermines the whole process of democracy in the party when you start excluding, as I say, that key element, I think, of the broad church of the Labour Party.
On the issues of the winter fuel payment, the 2-child cap limit, most of our audience will, of course, agree that they were mistakes that the Labour leadership made. I suppose a sort of challenge one could make to your idea of Labour Party democracy is if you put this out to a vote of MPs or members or whatever, they're never going to support really cutting anything. And Rachel Reeves is going to say, we've got to, we're having a difficult time when it comes to budgeting because growth has been so slow, et cetera, et cetera. So sort of what kind of vision for Labour policy could you put forward that you think someone like Rachel Reeves doing her bean counting in the Treasury might agree to?
The issue is the choices you have to make around the distribution of wealth and income within our country, isn't it, basically? And if in the preparation for a general election, you're ruling out increases in income tax, even on the wealthiest within our society, you're ruling out a wealth tax, and you're ruling out the increase in corporation tax. So in other words, on the corporations that are making the greatest profits within our economy, you box yourself into a situation where then you're looking at cuts. And that's why I think there was a huge mistake made in the run-up to the general election in limiting the flexibility of an incoming government, that these mistakes were then made. So therefore, I think if you were having that debate over the winter fuel allowance or over the 2-child limit, and you put to members of the Parliamentary Labour Party or the general membership of the Labour Party and said, look, we either increase income tax on the wealthiest and the ones with the largest incomes, exactly as Keir said we were supposed to be doing, which is those with the broadest shoulders should carry the heaviest burden. Either we're increasing income tax on those wealthiest, or we're cutting the winter fuel allowance or not scrapping the 2-child limit. I think I know which way Labour Party members would vote. And it would be about a traditional, very traditional, social democratic redistribution of income and wealth within our society to tackle poverty. And I think that's a mainstream view within the Labour Party.
And I imagine lots of our viewers will agree with what you've just said. I imagine there will be some, though, saying, John McDonnell, he's kidding himself. Keir Starmer has no interest whatsoever in listening to the left. The left-wing MPs are basically being humiliated by being suspended and then sort of having to beg to be let back in. It's time that John McDonnell and his ilk sort of stood up to Starmer, left the party, started a new party with Jeremy Corbyn, perhaps joined the Greens, but sort of asserted their independence and said, we're no longer going to be subject to the dictates of a party leadership that clearly doesn't like us very much and doesn't want us to be involved. How would you respond to that?
I've been in the party 50 years now, and these things come in waves. And what seems certain in one period can rapidly change in another. And within the Labour Party, it's always been, with the old language, it's always been a terrain of struggle. Well, that battle goes on within the Labour Party, and it may look a pretty tough battle at the moment, but things change, and often they can change rapidly. The key issue for us now is that we've got a Labour government that is becoming rapidly unpopular. That's resulting, unfortunately, as well, in a level of disillusionment within society that is shifting people's attitudes and support towards the right. And I actually do think with reform and the interventions from Musk and others, we're in a really dangerous situation. We've seen what's happened in Italy. We've seen the rise in France as well, and Germany of the far right. And I think we're in a really dangerous situation. That's why my view at the moment is that we need to wake up the Labour Party to the seriousness of the situation, for them to recognise that by destroying the broad church approach of the Labour Party, you're putting the whole of our society into a vulnerable position with regard to the extreme right. And that's why we need a united progressive left voice speaking up for working class people within our society. So I don't think the game is up within the Labour Party. I know others think it has. I think the struggle is still there. And as I see, things can change pretty rapidly. And you're talking to the person who, in 2015, at that point in time, most people didn't think we'd be able to get Jeremy Corbyn on a ballot paper, let alone become leader of the Labour Party. And I was the person who did the organisation with others, of course, to get Jeremy on the ballot paper and to manage his election campaign for the leadership of the party. So things can change. And as I say, these things come in waves. I actually do think there's a new wave building across our society, particularly in the younger generation on the progressive left, fighting on a whole range of causes, whether it's on the issues of Gaza or it's on individual industrial struggles or campaigns for civil liberties. I think that's building all the time now, and that's the opportunity then of building that sort of progressive left voice. The Labour Party, because its traditional connection to the working class and trade unions in particular, I think is still the potential vehicle for that. So that's why I don't think the game is up yet on the Labour Party, and that's why I'm willing to spend this coming period trying to, I think, restore that tradition of the broad church, because in that way we'll be stronger to fend off the far right.